Boy, that's
There's
a
a lot of
loaded
experts
question.
in North Bay.
That's a loaded question, right?
Yeah, it is.
I would
So
suggest to you at this particular point, the proposal is dead. That's an awful lot of questions, Dave. I guess.
Well, welcome to Small Town Times. Today we have Councillor Mark King, and we're going to talk about the proposed twin pad community center project that the tenders came in a little bit higher, 20 million higher than expected, and it's a hot topic at City Hall. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm good, Dave.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, very good, very good.
You were on the, you led the committee for the site selection 2014 to 2018. That's when you were on council there?
Exactly. Yes.
You were chairman of community services, I believe?
At that point, it was. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, tell me what you think about where it sits right now, but then we're going to go back and explain the process and the different groups and the different locations, just to give a quick summary of how the council came to pick Omischl in the first place, but also some of the, we'll touch upon some of the details of the other site locations people talk about, but also, and more importantly, where do we go from here?
Well, that's an awful lot of questions, Dave. I guess to answer your first question,
Yeah, pick them off one at a time.
Where is it now? I would suggest to you at this particular point, the proposal is dead. There is no possible way that you could ever find the necessary relief from spending in that proposed tender. There is no way that could happen. I knew it was going to happen that way, without question, Dave, because I've been involved in it for quite a long period of time. So I certainly understood the ramifications of what had taken place with the last council, not this council, but the last council. And the direction they had headed down. And certainly, when we look at the federal funding envelope, it appeared to me that basically the contractors took the old proposed tender price plus added the federal money to it and come out with that figure. I'll be honest, that the low tender figure was quite a bit higher than I expected. I had to bet at about 60, maybe somewhere in that range. But I guess when you look at what's transpired to this particular point, there's a certain part of me that actually feels sad for the city. I feel sad because, there was, I believe, when I was chair of community services, there was an avenue that we could have gone in if we'd moved forward at that particular time, but it never happened. And, the sheer disappointment to see what was proposed from an engineering or architectural standpoint was totally, totally disappointing for me. I've been around the construction company most of my life, and I'll get back to the committee itself. There were it was 7 o'clock in the morning meetings that we started, and we had some good people on there. Derek Shulgren, very level-headed. Chris Main, if I remember correctly. He's now in Calendar. He was on the committee for a period of time. Daryl Viancourt, if I remember correctly, and then and at sometimes if the mayor wasn't busy, he would show up at the committees also. So there was a long and what I consider to be a really exhaustive process that we went through. And John Severino, who is now our CAO in the city at the time, was the director of community services. So I spent a lot of time with John talking about what we were trying to do, where we were going, where I felt council was at that particular point. And we always have to remember that you know, at times, and I'm maybe guilty of this sometimes too, we kind of, you know, maybe lean on the staff a little bit too much, but we have to realize that staff are working at the direction of council. And there's reason for saying that when I look at the 4 years after I turned over community services to the, you know, to the next group. And, you know, obviously they went to the federal government, looked for the funding envelope, which was good. That's good. But they kind of lost control of the overall project. And to watch that, as I said, David, you know, it is disappointing. Where do we go from here forward? You know, I spent some time with Gary Gardner and I went south. We did look at the Canlan operations in Toronto. These are standalone for-profit builds. I think council, without question, has to look at that envelope. So is there a different way of doing this? Could we provide property and ask Canlan to operate? Is that an option? I'd certainly like to look at that to see whether or not that would be an option. I was in Thunder Bay 2 weeks ago, and on the way back, I stopped in Sault Ste. Marie. I spent about an hour and a half inside the new Sioux Arena. Actually, my wife wasn't. She wasn't overly happy about that because we were supposed to be heading on kind of a mini vacation. But because I was there, I wanted to go and look at it and see what it was all about and what they actually built there for $32 million. I know that number right off. Ellis Don certainly did the build. I know there was about $2 million in actual. They had to drive piles into the ground to support the arena. It's actually built attached to a seniors kind of community center that also houses 2 massive indoor soccer fields. So the arena is built on the would probably be the north side of that, and it's totally attached. The arena has 2 ice surfaces, a walking track in it, dressing rooms in the center. Upstairs, there were kind of community rooms, which were, at the time I was there, were all in use. Very interesting to see that. Through the lobby section of the arena, there were all kinds of kids in there, and I thought, you know, we're pretty well at summer, right? So I stopped and talked to some of the kids, and I asked them, you know, what do you do? How come you're in here? What are you doing here? So it turns out there's a high school not that far away from the facility. Kids were on a spare. They had time to study. They liked going to the arena, number one, because it was cool. Number 2, because it was very quiet in there, kind of a nice atmosphere. And there were kids. I'm not kidding you, Dave. There were kids all over the place in there. I thought, well, this is an interesting thing that's taking place. And when I kind of put two together, and you know, Omischl is adjacent to a school, very busy school.
Elementary too.
Yeah, it's elementary. And I thought, well, that's interesting. The other part of that whole build was it is in a probably what I would consider a mid-level residential area. Not overly busy. Very, very large parking lot was being constructed while I was there. It was huge. And you could see in the back part of the facility a tremendous amount of room for expansion in the future. And those are, I thought, were, you know, very wise moves that they made in Sault Ste. Marie. And I thought, why couldn't we just do something like this? Why couldn't, and I'll be honest with you, Dave, through the arena committee process, we did a lot of geotechnical information trying to look at the value of different locations. For example, the gardens. The gardens itself actually sits on a piece of bedrock. I don't know whether many people know that. That bedrock actually drops off on the back side of the gardens, and it was all swamp. That over a period of decades, that whole area was backfilled with poor fill. So when we looked at that opportunity, and there was a lot of there was pressure, I can tell you, by certain individuals wanting that arena at the gardens, and I just couldn't get my head around it. There were a number of reasons. Number one, geotechnical. What were the soil conditions like? Number two, if a minor hockey team was going to be playing a game in that facility, and the battalion were playing next door, you've got yourself a major traffic problem. So we looked at opportunities. How could we solve that? It was discussed at one point, maybe we secured parking at Northgate and we moved kids across from Northgate to the arena. Did not make a lot of sense. It didn't in my mind. The other governing factor was the fact that Chippewa Creek is right there. We knew for a fact that if we wanted to try and access, say, from McPhail Street, we're into a $6 million bridge. It just made absolutely no sense whatsoever. And, I know there are a number of people out in the city that see that as a real option.
I'm one of them, actually.
Yeah.
The geotechnical for the parking lot between the Y and the gardens is a good place to put another pad, and the parking could have been on the soft goo in the back.
Yeah,
And,
well,
considering the prices that are coming in today, $6 million bridge, I don't know.
Yeah, well, you got to remember, Dave, that was how many years ago? We're probably 8 years ago, close to 8 years.
Anyways, I'm just pushing back a little bit there.
Yeah.
And before we get too far along, when you're talking about the Sioux, I had heard the actual end cost is closer to 40.
Well, it could very well be, Dave, because they were doing a massive parking lot there.
And the other thing
was
that some of their costs weren't the same comparable to the Omischl new build, or something like a new build anywhere, because that was an existing sort of site. They're tying on to another building. It's not necessarily the same thing. And I want to ask you a question about the $70 million for the latest quote, the tender. Does that include the new intersection?
No.
Okay, so that's separate.
That's my understanding of it.
Okay.
And I haven't seen that information, but that was secondary to that whole process.
So even if it was 40 and there's a little bit, like, I just wanted to make the comparable really honest, right? Like, if you're building a twin pad box, cheapest as you can, you have to take into account the whole thing. I guess you'd have to, if you were going to do that style, move it up onto some more solid rock and Omischl instead of. Tell me about the flaw in that design at Omischl, anyways, having in two different supporting foundations.
Well, when I looked at the actual structure and the fact that one pad was going to sit on bedrock, and I'll tell you, from the arena committee's viewpoint, the fact that we had a city-owned piece of property that had bedrock on it, that you could build a facility like that, holy mackerel! Why? That's the best case scenario. Reducing your cost, you own it. It made all kinds of sense. The second pad was suspended over material, soil, that really didn't have a bottom to it. So in order to get to secure soil, there was about 45 feet of piling that was required to support that other pad. Now, I'm hearing that a lot of the costs that were driven in the proposal had a lot to do with the engineering of that one pad because it was suspended. And when you look at a twin pad like that, I mean, everything is about the plumbing, right? It's got to be secure. If it's not secure, you're setting yourself up for a real nasty event. And I certainly didn't want to, have that happen. I just, anyways, that was the part of the overall construction. I know what they were thinking. They were thinking they wanted the building closer to the fields. That's what they were thinking, without question. I don't think it, from a blasting standpoint, was really that far out to suggest that we couldn't take the top off. And there was some discussion. This was good thought. Could we not use a crusher machine on site and crush the granite into usable gravel? Like that's smart thinking. I watched the construction sites on the way out to Thunder Bay, and I drove out there. They're all doing it now. The big companies, they set up on site because the cost of material to move it is so expensive. It makes more sense to try and produce material right on the site. So I think that was it, and that was actually Councillor Gardner that came out with that idea. And I thought, that's wise. Why wouldn't you try to make that work?
I remember talking to him as well, and he was saying that the having two separate buildings costs a little bit extra because of the plumbing, the electrical. Right. You got an extra wall. Yeah. You're kind of adding costs.
Exactly. And, there was the thought process again was that the second pad at the back of the gardens would probably float, right? It's because of the material in there. And if that's going to float, oh boy.
Anyways, so you think it's dead in the water? And
the proposal, the tender proposals, in my mind, is dead. And I can tell you too. While I was out in Thunder Bay, I was with officials from another major city in Northern Ontario. They've shelved their arena developments. So everyone is searching to try and figure out how we get around this problem. It's a big problem.
What's the latest statistics we have as far as users and user groups and ice pad need?
Well, I'll be honest with you, Dave, I haven't seen that, and I've asked for that a number of times. I was certainly interested in the numbers of kids that are actually playing hockey, and I've been assured by officials inside minor hockey that their numbers are actually, I think the word was exploding, that there were a lot of kids playing hockey. I don't know, Dave. I'll be honest with you. Is the need there? I think it probably is.
I think it speaks more to the fact that when you do build something, you have to make sure it has other usability, and it's in the right spot.
Right. And I mean, when we looked at the Canlan operations, specifically close to Oshawa, it's right down on Lake Ontario. Dry land training during the summertime was a big item. So when you looked around the exterior of that facility, it was designed for that. So, when you start to look at even the battalion, for example, like, could they not use that opportunity around that rink? I think they could. I think it would be highly usable.
What do you mean?
dry land training during the summertime, right?
yeah.
If you've got the facility right at the arena, that makes tons of sense.
Yeah, well, they have a workout room there. We built one for them, didn't we?
Yeah, but
And they got the fields to run it.
You see kids nowadays, they play soccer. They play all these different games.
yeah.
There's all kinds of, and they need room to make that happen.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, good point. Good point there. But why do we need Canland to come in and do it? Why can't the city just operate like Canland does?
Wow, you want to try that one on, Dave?
Well, I'm asking the question. We have arena staff. We have economic development. We have business units. We know our area better than anybody.
Boy,
there's a lot of experts in North Bay.
That's a loaded question, right?
Yeah, it is.
So we're probably getting very close, and I don't know the exact date because I wasn't at the last council meeting. I was out west, but I would imagine we're getting very, very close to the overall evaluation of departments, and it'll be interesting to see how that's structured, what that finds, what are the opportunities. I guess the other part of it is, whether or not council has an interest to go down that road, and that'll be something that will be interesting for me to watch.